The champagne flute slipped from my sister's manicured fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the bridal suite. But it wasn't the crash that silenced the room. It was the sight of her fiancé, Detective Marcus Chen, dropping to one knee in his pristine dress uniform, his head bowed low as he spoke the words that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ma'am, I deeply apologize for my fiancé's conduct. How may I make this right? My sister Charlotte stood frozen, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror as she watched the man she was about to marry show me the respect she had spent a lifetime refusing to give. To understand how we reached that moment, you need to understand the invisible war that had been raging in the Blackwood family for 32 years. My name is Dr. Vivian Blackwood, and I am the Chief Medical Examiner for the state of California. But to my family, I was simply Charlotte's older sister, the serious one, the one who didn't need celebrating because I had everything figured out. Charlotte was the sun around which our family orbited. She was an interior designer with a flair for dramatic gestures and an even more dramatic personality. Every room she entered became her stage. Every conversation became about her latest project or her newest crisis. She had mastered the art of being perpetually overwhelmed by a life that others envied, and our parents had mastered the art of rushing to her rescue. The pattern had been established early. I was 7 when Charlotte was born, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she commanded attention in a way I never could. When I brought home straight A's, it was expected. When Charlotte managed a B-, it was cause for celebration. When I won the state science fair at 14, the congratulations dinner was canceled because Charlotte had fallen off her bike and needed comfort and ice cream. By the time I entered medical school, I had learned to celebrate my victories alone. The night I received my acceptance letter to Johns Hopkins, I found my parents in the living room consoling Charlotte over a breakup with her high school boyfriend. I waited 20 minutes for the right moment to share my news. When I finally spoke up, my mother patted my hand absently and said, "That's wonderful, dear. Now, Charlotte, tell me more about what happened with Ryan." The dismissal was so casual, so automatic, that it took my breath away. But I had learned not to fight for attention. Fighting meant being labeled difficult, demanding, selfish. So I took my celebration upstairs, called my best friend Sarah, and promised myself that one day, when I saved lives for a living, they would finally see my worth. I was wrong. Success, I discovered, only made me more invisible. The more accomplished I became, the more our parents seemed to believe I didn't need their recognition or support. It was as if my achievements were a given, predetermined, requiring no acknowledgement or pride. Meanwhile, Charlotte's every small victory was treated like a miracle, her every setback like a tragedy requiring all hands on deck. The week I completed my residency in forensic pathology, Charlotte called in tears because she couldn't decide between 2 paint colors for her new apartment. Guess which crisis received our parents' undivided attention? Hint, it wasn't the fact that their daughter had just become one of the youngest board-certified forensic pathologists in the state. But nowhere was this dynamic more painful than when it came to romantic relationships. Charlotte's dating life was front-page news in our family. Every boyfriend was dissected, analyzed, and either embraced or rejected based on his potential to make Charlotte happy. She had been engaged twice before Marcus, and both times our parents had treated the relationships like matters of national importance. When the first engagement ended, my mother took 3 days off work to help Charlotte process her feelings. When the second one fell apart, my father personally drove to the ex-fiancé's apartment to retrieve Charlotte's belongings. The family rallied around her heartbreak like she was recovering from a life-threatening illness. Meanwhile, my own relationships were treated as footnotes. I had been with Dr. James Morrison, a brilliant cardiac surgeon, for 3 years. We lived together, traveled together, and were discussing marriage. But somehow, James never quite became part of the family narrative. He was acknowledged politely at family gatherings, but he wasn't embraced, celebrated, or even really seen. The contrast became crystal clear the day Charlotte announced her engagement to Marcus. The call came on a Tuesday evening while I was reviewing case files in my home office. James was in the kitchen making dinner, and I could hear him humming while he cooked, a sound that always made me smile. My phone rang, and before I could even say hello, Charlotte's voice exploded through the speaker. "Vivian, oh my God, you'll never believe what just happened. Marcus proposed. We're engaged. Can you believe it? I'm getting married." The excitement in her voice was infectious, and despite our complicated relationship, I felt genuine happiness for her. "Charlotte, that's wonderful. Congratulations. Tell me everything." For the next 30 minutes, she regaled me with every detail of the proposal. Marcus had arranged for a flash mob in Golden Gate Park, complete with professional dancers and her favorite song. There were photographers hidden in the bushes, rose petals scattered across the bridge, and a string quartet that appeared as if by magic when she said yes. It was elaborate, expensive, and utterly Charlotte. I listened, made all the appropriate excited sounds, and felt a familiar pang of longing for that kind of attention, that kind of celebration, that kind of love that announced itself to the world. The next day, my mother called me 3 times to discuss wedding plans. Charlotte wanted a spring wedding, she said, and they were thinking of having it at the Fairmont Hotel. Did I think that was too extravagant? What about flowers? Should they go with traditional or modern? Had I ever seen such a beautiful ring? Each call lasted at least an hour. My mother was more animated than I had heard her in years, bubbling with excitement about venues and dresses and guest lists. She spoke about the engagement as if Charlotte had just won the lottery, as if this wedding would be the social event of the century. That same week, James and I had a conversation about our own future. We had been skirting around the topic of marriage for months, both of us knowing it was the natural next step, but neither quite ready to take the plunge. But something about Charlotte's engagement had crystallized things for me. "I've been thinking," James said one evening as we sat on our balcony overlooking the bay, "about us, about where this is headed." My heart did a little flip. And I love you, Vivian. I love your brilliant mind, your dedication to justice, the way you see things others miss. I love that you can spend 12 hours examining evidence that would most people sick, then come home and help me perfect a soufflé recipe. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I don't have a flash mob or a string quartet, but I have something better. I have certainty. Certainty that I want to spend my life with someone who makes me better, who challenges me, who sees the world with such clarity and compassion." The ring was perfect. Not the massive diamond Charlotte sported, but an elegant emerald surrounded d'Arsenal diamonds, sophisticated and timeless. It was exactly what I would have chosen for myself, which somehow made it even more meaningful. I said yes, of course. But as James slipped the ring onto my finger, I couldn't help but wonder what my family's reaction would be. Would they be excited? Would they celebrate this milestone with the same enthusiasm they had shown for Charlotte's engagement? I called my mother the next morning, my heart fluttering with anticipation. "Mom, I have some news. James proposed last night. We're engaged." There was a pause. Not the shocked, delighted gasp that had greeted Charlotte's announcement, but a pause. "Oh, that's nice, dear. Congratulations. Hold on a moment. Your father's trying to tell me something about the caterers."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I heard muffled conversation in the background, something about menu tastings and seating charts. When she came back to the phone, her voice was distracted. "Sorry, sweetheart, this wedding planning is consuming our lives. Did you say something about James?" "We're engaged, Mom. James and I are getting married." "Oh, yes, that's wonderful. Have you set a date? Please tell me it's not too close to Charlotte's wedding. You know how stressful this is for all of us." That was it. No excitement, no questions about how he proposed, no requests to see the ring, just a hope that my engagement wouldn't interfere with Charlotte's spotlight. I hung up feeling like I had announced a dental cleaning rather than one of the most important moments of my life. The difference in treatment became even more stark in the weeks that followed. Charlotte's engagement dominated every family conversation. My parents drove down to San Francisco twice to help her look at venues. They spent weekends researching photographers and florists. My father, who had never shown interest in party planning, suddenly became an expert on wedding traditions and reception logistics. Meanwhile, James and I planned our engagement quietly. We decided on a small ceremony in Napa Valley, intimate and elegant, surrounded by close friends and family. When I mentioned our plans at Sunday dinner, my mother nodded politely and immediately launched into a 20-minute monologue about Charlotte's dress shopping adventure. But the real test of my family's priorities came 6 weeks later, during what I now think of as the great schedule conflict of that spring. I had been selected to present my research on forensic toxicology advancements at the National Academy of Sciences annual conference in Washington, D.C. It was a tremendous honor, one that could define the trajectory of my career. The presentation was scheduled for a Saturday morning in April, and I had been preparing for months. The same weekend, Charlotte had scheduled her engagement party. When the conflict became apparent, I called a family meeting. We gathered in my parents' living room on a Tuesday evening, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could. "I know the timing is terrible," I said, "but this presentation is really important for my career. It's the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a lifetime. The conference organizers specifically requested me based on my work with the Morrison case." The Morrison case had been my breakthrough, a complex poisoning case that had stumped investigators for months until my analysis revealed a rare toxin that led to a conviction. It had earned me national recognition in forensic circles and established me as an expert in my field. My parents exchanged glances. My father cleared his throat. "Vivian, we understand that your work is important to you, but this is Charlotte's engagement party. We've already sent out invitations. The venue is booked. The caterers are hired. This is a once-in-a-lifetime celebration, too. But Charlotte will have a bachelorette party, a bridal shower, and a wedding," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "This conference presentation is a singular opportunity. It could change the course of my entire career." Charlotte, who had been silent until now, spoke up with that familiar tone of injured innocence that she had perfected over the years. "I can't believe you would even consider missing my engagement party for work. This isn't just any party, Vivian. This is about celebrating the most important decision of my life. I thought my sister would want to be there for me." The emotional manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost fell for it. Almost. But something in me had shifted since my engagement, since witnessing firsthand how differently my milestones were treated. A small flame of rebellion had been lit, and it was growing stronger. "Charlotte, I'm not saying I don't want to celebrate with you. I'm saying that the timing creates a conflict, and I'm hoping we can find a solution that works for everyone." "The solution is simple," my mother interjected. "You change your work schedule. Surely they can find someone else to give your presentation. There will be other conferences." The casualness of her dismissal took my breath away. She was suggesting that I give up a career-defining opportunity as if it were an optional social engagement, as if my professional achievements were negotiable commodities that could be rescheduled at will. "Mom, it doesn't work that way. This isn't a routine presentation. I was specifically selected based on my expertise. They're not going to find someone else to present my research." My father leaned forward, his expression serious. "Vivian, I think you're being a bit dramatic. It's one weekend. Your career will survive. But Charlotte's engagement party is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Family comes first." The irony was crushing. My career, built on years of education, dedication, and expertise, was being dismissed as drama. But Charlotte's party, one of many celebrations in her honor, was treated as sacred and unmovable. That night, I lay in bed next to James, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what had happened. "They want me to turn down the biggest professional opportunity of my career for an engagement party?" I said into the darkness. James turned toward me, his face serious. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to present at the conference," I said, and as I spoke the words, I felt something settle into place inside me. "I'm going to present my research to the National Academy of Sciences, and I'm going to advance my career, and I'm not going to apologize for it." What about the fallout? I considered this. There would be fallout. Charlotte would be hurt, my parents would be disappointed, and I would probably be painted as the selfish sister who chose work over family. But for the first time in my life, I was ready for that battle. "Let there be fallout," I said. "I've spent 32 years putting my life on hold for Charlotte's feelings. I've celebrated every one of her achievements while my own were ignored. I've watched my parents move heaven and earth for her convenience while treating my needs as optional. I'm done." The next morning, I called my parents and informed them of my decision. The reaction was swift and predictably harsh. My mother accused me of being selfish and unsupportive.
My father said he was disappointed in my priorities. Charlotte left a tearful voicemail calling me the worst sister in the world. But something surprising happened next. The silence that followed their anger was not empty or lonely. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells, trying to manage everyone else's emotions while neglecting my own needs. I presented my research at the National Academy of Sciences conference to a standing ovation. The presentation led to 3 job offers, including one from the FBI's Forensic Division. Media outlets picked up the story, and I was invited to appear on several news programs to discuss my work. Meanwhile, Charlotte's engagement party happened without me. From what I heard through the family grapevine, it was beautiful and well-attended, and Charlotte managed to enjoy herself despite the cloud as my absence. But the real consequences of my choice didn't become apparent until several weeks later, when Charlotte called with wedding plans. "I need to ask you something," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Marcus and I have been talking about the wedding, and we have a situation we need your help with." I waited, knowing that whatever came next would likely involve me providing something Charlotte needed while receiving nothing in return.
Marcus's family is very traditional, she continued. His parents are both retired police officers, and a lot of his friends are in law enforcement. They take protocol and hierarchy very seriously. Okay, I said cautiously. Well, Marcus mentioned that you work with law enforcement sometimes, right, with your job? This was an understatement. As chief medical examiner, I worked closely with police departments, detective bureaus, and federal agencies. I testified in court regularly, consulted on high-profile cases, and had developed professional relationships with law enforcement officials throughout the state. Yes, I work with police departments and detectives all the time. Why? Marcus thought it might be good if you could, mention that to his friends at the wedding. Help them see that our family has connections to law enforcement too. He's worried that his family will think he's marrying beneath him. The request was so absurd that I almost laughed. Charlotte wanted me to name-drop my professional credentials to impress her fiancé's family? The same professional credentials our own family had spent years dismissing as boring and unimportant. Charlotte, if Marcus's family cares about law enforcement connections, they'll probably be impressed to learn that his new sister-in-law is the chief medical examiner. I don't need to work it into conversation artificially. Well, yes, but I was hoping you could be a bit more proactive about it. Maybe wear something that shows your authority or bring up some of your big cases. I was quiet for a long moment, processing the audacity of the request. My family had spent decades minimizing my career, but now Charlotte wanted me to showcase it when it could benefit her social standing. I'll be myself at your wedding, Charlotte. If that impresses Marcus's family, great. If not, that's not my problem. God, Vivian, why do you have to be so difficult? I'm just asking for a little help. This is important to me. Everything is important to you, Charlotte. Your engagement party was so important that I was supposed to sacrifice a career milestone. Your dress shopping is so important that Mom has taken 4 personal days to help you. Your wedding is so important that I'm now being asked to perform like a trained SEAL to impress strangers. That's not what I'm asking. That's exactly what you're asking. You want me to use my professional reputation as a prop in your wedding theater, the same professional reputation you've never once acknowledged or celebrated. The conversation ended badly, with Charlotte hanging up on me in tears. Within an hour, my mother called to deliver a guilt trip about my attitude and my obligation to support my sister. By evening, I had received 3 text messages about how I was ruining Charlotte's wedding with my selfishness. But I had crossed a line that day, a line I didn't even know existed. I had refused to diminish myself for Charlotte's benefit, and there was no going back. The weeks leading up to the wedding were tense. Charlotte and I spoke only when necessary, usually through our mother as an intermediary. The conversations that did happen were stilted and formal, full of the kind of careful politeness that indicates deep underlying anger. I bought a beautiful navy blue dress for the wedding, elegant and professional without being attention-grabbing.
James rented a tuxedo and prepared to meet Marcus's law enforcement family as my partner, my equal, my chosen person. We made dinner reservations for the night after the wedding at a romantic restaurant overlooking the bay, planning to celebrate not just Charlotte's marriage, but our own engagement and our own future. I thought I was prepared for anything Charlotte might throw at me. I thought I had armored myself against her manipulations and our parents' favoritism. I thought I understood the dynamics I would be walking into. I was wrong. The morning of the wedding, I received a call from the maid of honor, Charlotte's college friend, Rebecca. Her voice was strained, almost panicked. "Vivian, I need to warn you about something. Charlotte is really angry about the engagement party thing, and she's been drinking mimosas all morning. She's saying things about your job, about how you think you're better than everyone else. I think she might cause a scene." My stomach dropped. What kind of scene? "She keeps talking about how you're not as important as you think you are, how your job is just looking at dead people all day. She's been practicing these little speeches about how family should come before career. I think she's planning to humiliate you somehow." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of Charlotte's resentment settling over me. Even on her wedding day, even in her moment of ultimate celebration, she couldn't resist the urge to diminish me. "Rebecca, thank you for the warning. I'll be prepared. Just be careful, okay? She's really worked up, and she has an audience now. Marcus's family is here, and she's playing up this whole narrative about how you chose work over family." After I hung up, I sat in my car outside the church, taking deep breaths and trying to center myself. This was Charlotte's wedding day, and despite everything, I wanted it to be beautiful for her. I wanted her to be happy. But I also knew that I wouldn't allow myself to be sacrificed on the altar of her happiness. Not anymore. James squeezed my hand as we walked into the church. "You okay?" "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. The ceremony was beautiful. Charlotte looked stunning in her designer gown, and Marcus looked genuinely smitten as she walked down the aisle. Their vows were heartfelt, and despite our complicated relationship, I felt tears prick my eyes as they exchanged rings. For a moment, I thought maybe Rebecca had been wrong. Maybe Charlotte would let her happiness overshadow her resentment. Maybe this day would be about love rather than family politics. I should have known better. The reception was held in the hotel's grand ballroom, decorated in Charlotte's signature style with cascading flowers and crystal chandeliers. The cocktail hour passed peacefully, with James and me mingling with other guests and making polite conversation. But I noticed Marcus's family immediately. They were a tight-knit group of current and former police officers, detectives, and their spouses. They carried themselves with a particular kind of confident authority that I recognized from my work. These were people who understood hierarchy, respect, and chain of command. They were also people who would immediately recognize those same qualities in others. During dinner, I found myself seated at a table with several of Marcus's colleagues from the police department. The conversation naturally turned to their work, and they began sharing stories about difficult cases and interesting investigations. "We had this poisoning case last year," said Detective Sarah Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s. "Completely stumped us for months. The victim showed all these weird symptoms, but the standard toxicology screens came back clean." "What solved it?" asked another detective. "The medical examiner caught something we all missed. Turned out to be some rare plant toxin that doesn't show up in routine tests. Without that analysis, we never would have caught the guy." I listened to the conversation with interest, recognizing the case they were describing. It sounded similar to several I had worked on, including the Morrison case that had established my reputation.
That's fascinating, I said. Toxicology is such a complex field. The number of substances that can mimic natural causes of death is incredible. Detective Martinez looked at me with newfound interest. "Are you in law enforcement?" Before I could answer, Charlotte's voice cut across the table like a knife. She had appeared beside us, clearly having overheard the conversation. "Oh, Vivian likes to think she's very important," Charlotte said, her words slightly slurred from the champagne. "She works with dead people all day and acts like she's solving crimes on TV." The table fell silent. James tensed beside me, and I could see the confusion in the detectives' faces as they tried to process Charlotte's tone and words. "Charlotte," I said quietly, "maybe we should—" "Should what? Pretend that you're some kind of hero? Pretend that looking at corpses all day makes you more important than everyone else?" Her voice was rising, and other tables were beginning to turn and stare. Detective Martinez frowned. "I'm sorry, what exactly do you do for work?" Before I could respond, Charlotte laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "She's a medical examiner. She thinks that makes her some kind of detective, but really she just cuts up dead bodies and writes reports that nobody reads." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the shock and disgust in the faces around the table as they processed not just Charlotte's words, but the casual cruelty with which she had delivered them. But it was Marcus who broke the silence. He had approached the table during Charlotte's tirade, and his face had gone pale as he heard his bride publicly humiliating her own sister. "Charlotte," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "what did you just say?" Charlotte turned to him with a bright, oblivious smile, apparently not recognizing the danger in his tone. "Oh, honey, I was just explaining to your friends what Vivian actually does for work. She likes to make it sound so impressive, but it's really—" "Stop." Marcus's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Stop talking right now." The entire ballroom seemed to have gone quiet. Conversations at nearby tables had died away as people sensed the tension radiating from the head table. Marcus looked at me, his face a mask of professional control, but I could see the mortification in his eyes. "Ma'am, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." The formality of his address sent a chill through the room. This wasn't Marcus the groom speaking to his sister-in-law. This was Detective Chen addressing a professional colleague. "Are you Dr. Vivian Blackwood?" I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "Yes." "Dr. Vivian Blackwood, Chief Medical Examiner for the state of California?" "Yes." "The Dr. Blackwood who solved the Richardson poisoning case, and the Morrison case, and who testified in the Hendricks murder trial?" "Yes." Marcus closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them, they were filled with a mixture of respect, embarrassment, and something that looked like awe. And then, in front of 300 wedding guests, in his dress uniform with his new wife watching in growing horror, Detective Marcus Chen dropped to one knee. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, "I deeply apologize for my fiancé's conduct. Your reputation in law enforcement is legendary. The Richardson case alone saved dozens of lives by identifying that contaminated water source. How may I make this right?" The champagne glass slipped from Charlotte's fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The sound of breaking glass seemed to echo through the ballroom for an eternity. Every eye in the room was fixed on the tableau before them. Marcus Chen, decorated police detective, kneeling in his dress uniform before me, while his bride stood frozen in horror, champagne dripping from her fingers onto her designer gown. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 300 stares, could sense the collective held breath of an entire wedding reception waiting to see how this moment would resolve. Detective Martinez was the first to move. She rose from her chair with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to taking control of chaotic situations. Her voice cut through the silence with professional authority. "All rise for Dr. Blackwood," she said, and the command rippled through the law enforcement tables like a stone dropped in still water. One by one, Marcus's colleagues stood, their faces serious and respectful. Charlotte's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She looked around the ballroom in growing panic, finally beginning to understand that something had gone catastrophically wrong with her plan to humiliate me. "Marcus, what are you doing?" she whispered, but her voice carried in the unnatural quiet. "Get up! Everyone's staring." Marcus didn't move from his position. If anything, his posture became more rigid, more formal. "Ma'am," he said, addressing his wife, completely ignoring his wife,
I served under Captain Rodriguez in the narcotics division before my promotion to detective. He still talks about your testimony in the Sanchez case, said it was the most thorough forensic analysis he'd seen in 20 years of police work. I found my voice, though it came out steadier than I felt. Detective Chen, please stand up. This is your wedding day. With respect, ma'am, this is exactly why I can't stand up. Not yet. His eyes met mine, and I saw genuine distress there. My wife has just publicly disrespected an officer whose work has saved lives, whose expertise has put murderers behind bars, whose reputation in law enforcement is beyond reproach. I can't let that stand without acknowledgement. The ripple effect of his words spread through the room. Guests who hadn't understood the significance of the moment began to whisper among themselves. Chief medical examiner? That's the doctor from the news. Didn't she solve that serial killer case? My parents, who had been sitting at the head table in stunned silence, suddenly seemed to realize that their older daughter was not, in fact, being publicly humiliated. Instead, she was being honored by a room full of law enforcement professionals who clearly held her in the highest regard. My father's face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical under different circumstances. Confusion gave way to recognition, which gave way to something that looked uncomfortably like pride mixed with embarrassment. My mother's reaction was more complex. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, her eyes taking in the respectful attention I was receiving, the deference being shown by Marcus and his colleagues, the obvious professional reputation I had built outside of her awareness. But it was Charlotte's face that held my attention. The smug confidence had drained away completely, replaced by a dawning horror as she began to understand the magnitude of her mistake. She had intended to expose me as a pretender, to reveal my career as less impressive than I made it seem. Instead, she had revealed herself as someone so disconnected from her own sister's life that she didn't even understand what I did for a living. Dr. Blackwood, said another voice from the law enforcement section. I turned to see an older man with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Deputy Chief Harrison, SFPD. I wanted to personally thank you for your work on the waterfront murders last year. Your analysis was instrumental in establishing the connection between the victims. Thank you, Deputy Chief, I replied, my voice growing stronger. It was a challenging case. Challenging cases seem to be your specialty, he said with a slight smile. I've read your papers on post-mortem toxicology. Brilliant work.
Charlotte made a small, desperate sound. "Stop," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the murmur of conversation that had begun to spread through the ballroom. "Just stop." Marcus finally stood, but his expression remained serious and formal. "Charlotte, I need you to understand something," he said, his voice pitched for her ears but audible to those nearby. "Dr. Blackwood isn't just any medical examiner. She's the chief medical examiner for the entire state. She's testified before Congress on forensic standards. She's helped solve cases that made national headlines." "I don't care," Charlotte said, her voice rising to nearly a shriek. "I don't care about her stupid job or her stupid cases or any of it. This is my wedding day, and she's ruining it just like she ruins everything." The words hung in the air like a physical presence, the naked selfishness of them, the complete disregard for the respect and admiration being shown by Marcus's colleagues, the reduction of my life's work to stupid job. It was too much for the room to ignore. Detective Martinez stepped forward, her face hard. "Mrs. Chen," she said, and the use of Charlotte's new married name seemed to hit her like a slap. "I think you need to understand what you're talking about. Dr. Blackwood solved a case last year that my department had given up on. A young mother had died, and we thought it was natural causes. Dr. Blackwood's analysis proved it was murder and led to the arrest of the woman's husband." "I don't care," Charlotte said, her voice rising to nearly a shriek. "I don't care about her stupid job or her stupid cases or any of it. This is my wedding day, and she's ruining it just like she ruins everything." The words hung in the air like a physical presence, the naked selfishness of them, the complete disregard for the respect and admiration being shown by Marcus's colleagues, the reduction of my life's work to stupid job. It was too much for the room to ignore. Detective Martinez stepped forward, her face hard. "Mrs. Chen," she said, and the use of Charlotte's new married name seemed to hit her like a slap. "I think you need to understand what you're talking about. Dr. Blackwood solved a case last year that my department had given up on. A young mother had died, and we thought it was natural causes. Dr. Blackwood's analysis proved it was murder and led to the arrest of the woman's husband." "I don't want to hear about dead people on my wedding day," Charlotte said, but her voice was shaking now. "Dead people who got justice because of your sister," said another detective. "Dead people whose families got closure because of your sister. Dead people whose killers are in prison because of your sister." The weight of their words, the respect in their voices, the clear admiration they had for my work, it was creating a picture of my professional life that my family had never seen, never bothered to ask about, never understood. My mother stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Perhaps we should all take a breath," she said, her voice carrying the false brightness she used when trying to manage difficult situations. "This is getting a bit intense for a wedding reception." "Sit down, Mom," I said quietly, and something in my voice made her comply immediately. I looked around the room, taking in the faces of the wedding guests. Marcus's law enforcement colleagues were watching me with professional respect. Other guests were looking between Charlotte and me with growing understanding of the dynamic they were witnessing. My parents sat frozen, apparently realizing for the first time that their dismissal of my career might not have been as justified as they'd believed. James stood beside me, his hand finding mine and squeezing gently. His presence grounded me, reminded me that I wasn't alone in this moment. I took a deep breath and addressed the room. "I appreciate the kind words about my work," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "But this is Charlotte's wedding day, and I don't want to take away from that celebration." It was a gracious response, designed to de-escalate the situation and return focus to the bride and groom. It was also a response that my family would have expected from me, the diplomatic, older sister, always ready to smooth things over and minimize herself for the sake of family harmony. But Charlotte wasn't done. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "Don't you dare act like you're being noble. This is exactly what you always do. You make everything about you, you make everyone feel sorry for you, you turn yourself into the victim." The accusation was so far from reality that it left me breathless. I was the one who always stepped aside, who always accommodated, who always put family harmony before my own needs. "Charlotte," Marcus said, his voice warning. "No, Marcus, I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of everyone acting like she's so special because she has some important job. I'm tired of Mom and Dad treating her like she doesn't need anything from them because she's so independent and successful." The words spilled out of her in a torrent of resentment that had clearly been building for years. "Do you know what it's like growing up with a perfect sister? Do you know what it's like having everyone expect you to be as smart as she is, as accomplished as she is, as responsible as she is?" I stared at her, genuinely shocked. "Charlotte, you never had to try because it all came so easy to you. School, career, everything. And now you can't even let me have one day without making it about your work, your achievements, your perfect life." The irony was staggering. Charlotte, who had been the center of our parents' attention our entire lives, was accusing me of trying to steal her spotlight. Charlotte, whose every milestone had been celebrated while mine were ignored, was claiming that I was the favored child. But what struck me most was the genuine pain in her voice. For the first time, I glimpsed the possibility that Charlotte's need for constant attention might stem from her own insecurities rather than mere selfishness. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped explain it. "Charlotte," I said gently, "I never wanted to compete with you. I just wanted to be seen." "You are seen," she shot back. "Everyone sees you. Everyone respects you. Everyone thinks you're so impressive with your medical degree and your important cases." "Not everyone," I said quietly, and my eyes moved to our parents. My mother's face crumpled. She suddenly looked older, more fragile than I had ever seen her. "Oh, Vivian," she whispered, "we do see you. We've always seen you." "No, Mom, you haven't. You've seen what you wanted to see. You've seen the daughter who didn't need celebrating, who didn't need support, who didn't need acknowledgement because she was strong enough to handle anything on her own."
My father cleared his throat, his voice rough. "We're proud of you, sweetheart. We've always been proud of you." When? The question came out sharper than I intended. When have you ever shown me that? When have you ever celebrated my achievements the way you celebrate Charlotte's? When have you ever made me feel like my life mattered as much as hers? The silence that followed was answer enough. Deputy Chief Harrison, who had been watching this family drama unfold with the patience of someone who had witnessed his share of domestic disputes, stepped forward. "Dr. Blackwood," he said, "I'm sorry you're dealing with this family situation at what should be a celebration. But I want you to know that in law enforcement circles, you're considered one of the finest forensic pathologists in the country. Your work speaks for itself." His words carried weight, not just because of his rank, but because they came from outside the family dynamics that had shaped my entire life. Here was validation from my professional peers, recognition from people who understood the value and difficulty of my work. "Thank you, Deputy Chief," I said. "That means a great deal." Marcus looked between his new wife and me, his expression pained. "Charlotte, I need you to understand something. In my world, Dr. Blackwood is legendary. She's solved cases that saved lives, prevented murders, brought justice to families who thought they'd never get answers." "I don't care about your world," Charlotte said. "But it's my world now too, isn't it? We're married."
My colleagues, my career, my values, they're part of your life now. Marcus's voice was patient but firm. And respect for expertise, for dedication, for service, those are values that matter to me. I could see Charlotte beginning to realize that her public humiliation of me hadn't just backfired in terms of my reputation. It had also revealed something about her character to her new husband and his professional community. Detective Martinez approached Charlotte, her manner professional but not unkind. "Mrs. Chen, I don't know what your relationship with your sister has been like, but I want you to understand who she is in our community. Dr. Blackwood has dedicated her life to speaking for people who can no longer speak for themselves. She gives voice to victims, brings closure to families, ensures that justice is served." "She cuts up dead bodies," Charlotte said weakly, but the words lacked the venom they had carried earlier. "She reveals truth," Detective Martinez corrected. "She finds evidence that living people miss. She pieces together the last moments of someone's life to ensure their killer doesn't go free. It's one of the most important jobs in law enforcement." Charlotte looked around the room, finally seeming to understand the magnitude of her mistake. The law enforcement tables were watching her with expressions that ranged from disappointment to disgust. Other guests were whispering among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. "I didn't know," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "You didn't want to know," I replied, and the truth of it settled between us like a stone. My mother stood up again, her movements uncertain. "I think perhaps we should move to the reception hall," she said, clearly desperate to salvage what remained of the evening. But Marcus shook his head. "Actually, I think we need to address this properly first." He turned to face the entire room, his posture straight and his voice carrying the authority of his rank and position. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to formally apologize for the disrespectful treatment you've witnessed toward Dr. Blackwood this evening. As law enforcement professionals, we understand the critical importance of forensic pathology, and we have nothing but the highest respect for Dr. Blackwood's contributions to justice." A murmur of agreement rippled through the law enforcement section. Marcus continued, "Dr. Blackwood, on behalf of myself and my colleagues, I want to thank you for your service and apologize for any discomfort you've experienced this evening." It was a formal, public apology that acknowledged not just Charlotte's behavior, but the broader pattern of disrespect I had endured from my family. Coming from the groom at his own wedding reception, it carried enormous weight. Charlotte stood beside her new husband, tears streaming down her face, finally understanding that her attempt to diminish me had instead revealed her own character flaws to everyone present. My parents looked stricken, perhaps finally recognizing the years of dismissal and neglect they had shown toward my achievements. And I stood in the center of it all, surrounded by professional colleagues who saw my worth, supported by a partner who respected my work, finally experiencing the recognition I had craved my entire life. But the moment felt hollow rather than triumphant. This wasn't how I had wanted to be seen by my family.
I had never wanted to be celebrated at Charlotte's expense or to have my worth proven through her humiliation. I looked at my sister, seeing past her tears and anger to the insecurity beneath. For all her privileged treatment, Charlotte had spent her life feeling inadequate compared to my achievements. Our parents' overprotection and celebration of her smaller victories had been their way of trying to boost her confidence, but it had created a dynamic that hurt both of us. "Charlotte," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "I never wanted you to feel like you were competing with me. I just wanted our parents to see that both their daughters had value, that both of us deserved celebration and support." She looked at me through her tears, and for a moment I saw not the spoiled sister who had tormented me, but a woman who had spent her life feeling less than, trying to measure up to a standard she thought she could never reach. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and I could tell she meant it. "I know," I replied, and I did. The room remained tense, guests uncertain how to proceed from such an unprecedented situation. The evening hung in the balance, capable of being salvaged or collapsing completely based on the next few moments. James squeezed my hand, reminding me that whatever I decided, he would support me. The law enforcement professionals continued to watch with respectful attention. My parents sat in stunned silence, processing revelations about both their daughters. And Marcus waited, still formal and respectful, for my response to his apology. I realized in that moment that I had a choice. I could accept the public vindication, allow Charlotte's wedding to crumble under the weight of her actions, and let this moment serve as the ultimate proof of my worth. Or I could do something else entirely. "Detective Chen," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, "I accept your apology, and I appreciate the respect you and your colleagues have shown. But this is your wedding day, and despite everything, I want it to be a celebration of your marriage to my sister." I turned to address the room. "Charlotte and I have a complicated relationship, and that's something we need to work out between ourselves. But tonight is about celebrating love, commitment, and new beginnings. I hope we can all focus on that." It was a gracious response, one that offered Charlotte a way back from the brink of complete social disaster while still maintaining my dignity and the respect I had earned. Marcus's expression shifted from formal courtesy to genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Dr. Blackwood. That's very generous of you." Charlotte looked at me with something that might have been the beginning of real respect. "Vivian, let's talk later," I said quietly. "Right now, you have a husband to celebrate with." The tension in the room didn't disappear entirely, but it shifted, became manageable. Conversations began to resume, though at a lower volume than before. The law enforcement tables maintained their respectful attention, but the crisis had passed. My parents approached hesitantly, their faces uncertain. "Vivian," my mother began, "we need to talk." "Yes," I agreed, "we do, but not tonight." My father nodded, looking older than his years. "We've made mistakes," he said simply. "Yes, you have, but so have I. We all have work to do." As the evening progressed, something unexpected began to happen. Marcus's colleagues made a point of including me in their conversations, asking about my work, sharing their own experiences with forensic investigations. Instead of being the ignored family member sitting quietly at the side, I found myself engaged in fascinating discussions about criminal justice, forensic science, and the intersection of law enforcement and medicine. For the first time in my life at a family event, I was seen not as Charlotte's sister or my parents' daughter, but as Dr. Vivian Blackwood, a professional with expertise and experience worth hearing. James watched it all with quiet satisfaction, occasionally joining the conversations, but mostly content to see me finally receiving the respect and attention I deserved. Charlotte, meanwhile, was working hard to salvage her wedding reception. She moved through the room with determined grace, thanking guests for coming, ensuring everyone had what they needed, playing the perfect hostess. But I noticed that she kept glancing in my direction, her expression thoughtful and perhaps a little guilty. As the evening wound down, she approached me at the bar where I was talking with Detective Martinez about a complex toxicology case. "Vivian," she said quietly, "could I speak with you privately?" Detective Martinez excused herself tactfully, and Charlotte and I stepped onto a quiet balcony overlooking the city lights. For a long moment we stood in silence, both of us processing the events of the evening and the revelations that had emerged. "I really didn't know," she said finally, "about your job. About what you actually do. I thought you just worked in a lab somewhere writing reports. I know, I replied. But Charlotte, that's because you never asked. In 32 years, you've never once asked me about my work, my life, my interests. You've never shown curiosity about who I am outside of being your sister. She was quiet, absorbing the truth of my words. I was jealous, she admitted. I've always been jealous of you.
You made everything look so easy, so effortless. School, career, relationships. I felt like I could never measure up. And I was jealous of you, I said, surprising her. You got all the attention, all the celebration, all the support. Every small achievement of yours was treated like a miracle, while my major accomplishments were ignored. We looked at each other, two sisters who had spent their lives misunderstanding each other's experiences. Mom and Dad really messed us up, didn't they? Charlotte said with a rueful smile. They did their best with what they knew, I replied diplomatically. No, Vivian, they played favorites, and it damaged both of us. It made me insecure and dependent on their approval, and it made you feel invisible and unappreciated. We looked at each other, two sisters who had spent their lives misunderstanding each other's experiences. Mom and Dad really messed us up, didn't they? Charlotte said with a rueful smile. They did their best with what they knew, I replied diplomatically. No, Vivian, they played favorites, and it damaged both of us. It made me insecure and dependent on their approval, and it made you feel invisible and unappreciated. The honesty was refreshing, even if it was painful. What do we do now? She asked. I considered the question. The damage from years of family dysfunction couldn't be undone in a single conversation, but perhaps we could start building something healthier. We learn about each other, I said finally. We ask questions, we pay attention, we try to see each other as separate people, not just as roles in the family story. Charlotte nodded, tears in her eyes again, but different tears this time. These weren't tears of self-pity or frustration, but of recognition and perhaps hope. I'm sorry about tonight, she said. I'm sorry about a lot of things. I know, and I'm sorry too. I could have tried harder to connect with you over the years. You shouldn't have had to, she said firmly. I was the one acting like a spoiled brat. I was the one who never bothered to learn about your life. We talked for another hour on that balcony, saying things that had needed to be said for decades. It wasn't a magical reconciliation that solved all our problems, but it was a beginning. When we rejoined the reception, Marcus approached us both, his expression hopeful. Everything okay? He asked. Charlotte slipped her arm through his, looking more genuine than she had all evening. We're working on it, she said. Good, Marcus replied, then turned to me. Dr. Blackwood, I hope you know that you're always welcome in our home. I'd be honored to have you as a sister-in-law. The gesture meant more to me than he could have known. For the first time, I felt like I was being invited into my sister's life, rather than merely tolerated on the periphery. As James and I prepared to leave, my parents approached us one final time. Vivian, my mother said, her voice thick with emotion, we owe you an apology, a big one. We do, my father agreed. We've been blind, and we've been unfair, and we've hurt you in ways we're only beginning to understand. I looked at these two people who had shaped my entire life, who had loved me, but had somehow failed to see me. They looked smaller than I remembered, more vulnerable, as if the evening's revelations had stripped away some protective illusion they had carried. I know you meant well, I said carefully, but intent doesn't erase impact. No, it doesn't, my mother agreed. We want to do better. We want to learn how to do better. Then ask me about my life, I said simply. Ask me about my work, my cases, my achievements. Celebrate my successes the way you celebrate Charlotte's. See me as a whole person, not just as the strong daughter who doesn't need anything. We will, my father promised, and something in his voice suggested he meant it. As James and I walked to our car, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. The evening had been a disaster in many ways, but it had also been a breakthrough.
Secrets had been revealed, truths had been spoken, and for the first time in my life, my professional accomplishments had been recognized and celebrated by my family. "How do you feel?" James asked as we drove through the quiet city streets. I considered the question carefully. "Different," I said finally. "Like something has shifted that can't be shifted back." "Good different or bad different?" "Both, I think. It's going to be complicated for a while. We all have a lot of work to do. But it's a start?" I nodded, watching the city lights blur past the window. It's definitely a start. The next morning, I woke to find 17 missed calls and 43 text messages on my phone. Word of the previous evening's events had spread through the law enforcement community, and colleagues from across the state were reaching out to express their support and share their own stories about working with me. But the message that meant the most came from Charlotte. It was simple and brief. "Thank you for saving my wedding. Can we have lunch this week? I want to hear about your work." For the first time in 32 years, my sister was asking to learn about my life. I smiled and typed back, "I'd like that very much." 3 months after Charlotte's wedding, I sat across from her at a small cafe in downtown San Francisco, watching her carefully read through a forensic report I had brought to explain a particularly complex case. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, and she paused occasionally to ask questions that showed she was genuinely trying to understand the technical aspects of my work. "So, when you found traces of this particular compound in the victim's tissue samples, that's what led you to realize it wasn't a natural death?" "Exactly. The compound doesn't occur naturally in the human body, and it has a very specific signature that most standard toxicology screens miss. It took 3 different tests to identify it definitively." Charlotte leaned back in her chair, shaking her head in amazement. "Vivian, this is incredible. You literally solved a murder that everyone else thought was an accident. You gave this family answers they never would have gotten otherwise." The genuine admiration in her voice was something I had waited my entire life to hear from a family member. These monthly lunches had become a ritual for us, a way of slowly building the relationship we had never had as children. Charlotte had proven surprisingly curious about my work, asking detailed questions and remembering details from previous conversations. "It's not always that dramatic," I said with a smile. "Sometimes I spend weeks analyzing samples only to confirm that yes, the person did die of natural causes. But even then, you're giving families certainty. You're answering questions that would otherwise haunt them forever." I nodded, touched by her understanding. "That's exactly how I see it. Every case matters, even the straightforward ones." My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see it was from my mother. Over the past few months, she had been making a concerted effort to stay connected with my life, checking in regularly and asking about my cases. The message read, "Saw the article about your testimony in the Hartwell case. So proud of you."
Dad says to tell you congratulations on helping catch that monster. I showed the message to Charlotte, who smiled. Mom's really trying, isn't she? She is. They both are. It's still awkward sometimes, but I can see the effort. Our parents had indeed been working to repair the damage from decades of unequal treatment. My father had started reading articles about my cases online, and my mother had begun asking detailed questions about my work during our weekly phone calls. It wasn't perfect, and there were moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, but the foundation of respect that had been established at Charlotte's wedding seemed to be holding. "Speaking of Mom and Dad," Charlotte said, stirring her coffee, "they want to throw you a celebration dinner for your promotion to State Chief Medical Examiner." I had received the promotion 6 weeks earlier, a career pinnacle that represented recognition of my expertise and leadership at the highest levels of forensic pathology. The appointment had made national news in law enforcement circles and had been covered by several major newspapers. "They want to celebrate me?" I asked, still sometimes surprised by this new dynamic. "They're practically bursting with pride. Dad has been telling everyone at his office about his daughter, the State Chief Medical Examiner. Mom has been researching forensic pathology online so she can better understand what you do." The image of my parents actively learning about my career was both touching and surreal. "That would be nice," I said, "as long as it doesn't interfere with any of your events." Charlotte reached across the table and took my hand. "Vivian, stop. We've moved past that.
Your achievements deserve celebration, period, not just when they fit conveniently around my schedule. The directness of her statement, the acknowledgement of how things used to be, and the commitment to doing better meant everything to me. We had both grown from the painful revelations at her wedding, but Charlotte's growth had been particularly remarkable to witness. "How are things with Marcus?" I asked, changing the subject to more comfortable ground. Charlotte's face lit up. "Really good. Better than good, actually. He's been helping me understand the law enforcement world, and I've been learning about his work. Did you know he's being considered for a promotion to sergeant? That's wonderful. He's a good detective and a good man." "He is. And Vivian, he talks about you all the time. He tells his colleagues stories about your cases, shares articles about your work. I think he's prouder of having you as a sister-in-law than he is of some of his own professional accomplishments." This was new territory for me, having an in-law who actively celebrated my achievements and understood their significance. Marcus had indeed proven to be an unexpected ally, someone who bridged the gap between my professional world and my family life in ways that enriched both. "I'm glad you two are happy," I said sincerely. "We are, and part of that happiness comes from having a relationship with you that's real, instead of just obligatory family gatherings. I love getting to know my sister as an actual person, instead of just as a role in the family dynamic." As we finished our lunch, Charlotte brought up something that had been on her mind. "I've been thinking about our childhood a lot lately," she said, "trying to understand how we got so lost from each other." "It wasn't entirely our fault," I replied. "We were responding to the environment we grew up in." "Maybe, but I could have made different choices. I could have asked you about your interests, your dreams, your work. I could have been a better sister. And I could have been more patient with you, more understanding of the pressure you felt to live up to my achievements." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both acknowledging the complexity of our shared history and the work we had both done to move beyond it. "There's something I want to tell you," Charlotte said suddenly, "something I've never told anyone." I waited, sensing the importance of whatever she was about to share. "When we were kids, I used to sneak into your room when you were studying and just watch you. You were so focused, so determined, so sure of what you wanted to do with your life. I was fascinated by your sense of purpose, but I was also terrified that I would never find anything I cared about that much." The revelation surprised me. I had always assumed Charlotte found my studiousness boring, another example of how different we were. "I never knew you felt that way." "How could you? I spent so much energy pretending I thought your interests were stupid. But the truth is, I was envious of your passion, your direction, your certainty about your future. And I was envious of how easily everything seemed to come to you, how effortlessly you commanded attention and affection." "Nothing came easily to me, Vivian. I just got better at hiding the struggle. But you never hid from anything. You faced challenges head-on, worked harder than anyone I knew, and built something amazing with your life." These conversations had become a regular part of our relationship, honest examinations of our past that helped us understand each other and ourselves better. It was healing in a way I hadn't expected, this process of rewriting the story of our sisterhood. My phone rang, interrupting our moment of reflection. The caller ID showed it was Detective Martinez from the San Francisco Police Department. "I'm sorry, Charlotte. I need to take this. It might be about a case." She nodded understandingly as I answered the call. "Dr. Blackwood, we have a situation that requires your immediate expertise. There's been a suspicious death at the Meridian Hotel, and the circumstances are unusual enough that we'd like you to examine the scene personally." "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I replied, already mentally shifting into professional mode. As I ended the call, Charlotte was watching me with interest rather than annoyance. "Important case?" "Potentially. I need to go examine a crime scene." "That's so fascinating. I mean, I know it's serious and probably tragic, but the detective work aspect of what you do is incredible." 6 months ago, Charlotte would have rolled her eyes and complained about our lunch being cut short. Now, she was showing genuine interest in my work and understanding of its importance. "I'll call you later and tell you about it if I can," I said. "I'd love that. Be safe and go solve another mystery, Dr. Blackwood." The use of my professional title, said with pride rather than mockery, was still new enough to make me smile. The crime scene at the Meridian Hotel turned out to be one of the most complex cases of my career. The victim, a pharmaceutical executive, had died in circumstances that initially appeared to be a heart attack, but revealed themselves to be far more sinister upon closer examination. The investigation took 3 weeks and involved collaboration with federal agencies, international pharmaceutical companies, and toxicology experts from around the world. My analysis revealed a sophisticated poisoning scheme involving a rare compound that mimicked cardiac arrest symptoms while being virtually undetectable in standard postmortem examinations. The case made international headlines when the investigation uncovered a corporate conspiracy involving industrial espionage and murder. My testimony was crucial in securing convictions against 3 individuals, including the victim's business partner and 2 hired assassins. The night the verdicts were announced, my phone rang with congratulations from colleagues across the country. But the call that meant the most came from my parents. "Vivian, sweetheart, we just saw the news coverage," my mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "We are so incredibly proud of you." My father's voice came on the line, speaking over the speakerphone. "Honey, watching you testify on the news, seeing the respect those lawyers and judges showed you, understanding the complexity of what you accomplished in this case, we just want you to know that we finally see you."
Really see you. We've always loved you, my mother added, but we haven't always understood what an extraordinary person you are, what incredible work you do. We're sorry it took us so long to really pay attention. These conversations with my parents had become more frequent and more meaningful since Charlotte's wedding. They were making genuine efforts to understand my work, to celebrate my achievements, to include me in family discussions in ways that acknowledged my expertise and accomplishments. "Thank you," I said, meaning it deeply. "That means everything to me." "We want to have a family dinner to celebrate," my father said, "just the 4 of us, so we can properly honor what you've accomplished with this case." "I'd like that very much." The family dinner 2 nights later was unlike any meal we had shared in my entire life. Instead of Charlotte's latest projects dominating the conversation, my parents asked detailed questions about the pharmaceutical case, about my career, about my plans for the future. Charlotte, rather than competing for attention, actively facilitated the conversation, asking follow-up questions that allowed me to share more details about my work. She had clearly done research beforehand, understanding enough about forensic pathology to ask intelligent questions that helped our parents better comprehend the significance of my achievements. "Thank you," I said, meaning it deeply. "That means everything to me." "We want to have a family dinner to celebrate," my father said, "just the 4 of us, so we can properly honor what you've accomplished with this case." "I'd like that very much." The family dinner 2 nights later was unlike any meal we had shared in my entire life. Instead of Charlotte's latest projects dominating the conversation, my parents asked detailed questions about the pharmaceutical case, about my career, about my plans for the future. Charlotte, rather than competing for attention, actively facilitated the conversation, asking follow-up questions that allowed me to share more details about my work. She had clearly done research beforehand, understanding enough about forensic pathology to ask intelligent questions that helped our parents better comprehend the significance of my achievements. "I read that you're considered one of the leading experts in toxicology-based homicides," my mother said. "How did you develop that specialization?" I spent 20 minutes explaining my career path, the cases that had shaped my expertise, the ongoing research I was conducting. My parents listened with the kind of focused attention they had always given to Charlotte's stories, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen by my family. "I can't believe we never asked you about this before," my father said, shaking his head. "Your work is fascinating and clearly incredibly important." "It's okay, Dad. We're asking now, and that's what matters." After dinner, Charlotte and I stepped outside onto my parents' back patio while they cleaned up the dishes. "Thank you," I said, "for tonight, for these past few months, for working so hard to change our relationship." "Thank you for giving me the chance to know my sister," she replied. "I feel like I've been missing out on having this incredible person in my life because I was too self-absorbed to pay attention." We stood in comfortable silence, looking up at the stars and reflecting on how much had changed since that terrible and wonderful night at her wedding. "I have something to tell you," Charlotte said suddenly. "Marcus and I have been talking about starting a family." "That's wonderful news, Charlotte. You'll be a great mother." "I hope so, but I've been thinking about what kind of aunt I want you to be to our children."
I looked at her curiously, wondering where this was leading. "I want them to know that their Aunt Vivian is a hero," she said simply. "I want them to understand that she speaks for people who can't speak for themselves, that she solves mysteries that help families find peace, that she's dedicated her life to justice and truth." The words hit me harder than I expected, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "I want them to be proud to have you as their aunt, the way I'm proud to have you as my sister." Charlotte. I mean it, Vivian. I want to raise children who understand that there are different kinds of success, different kinds of importance, different ways to make the world better. I want them to see your career as something to aspire to, not just the traditional paths that get more obvious recognition. Standing there under the stars, I realized that the little girl who had always felt invisible in her own family had finally been seen, not just by her colleagues and the broader professional community, but by the people who mattered most. "I'd be honored to be their aunt," I said, meaning it completely. 6 months later, James and I were married in a small ceremony in Napa Valley, surrounded by close friends and family. The guest list included my parents, Charlotte and Marcus, and several colleagues from the forensic pathology and law enforcement communities. But what made the day truly special wasn't just the celebration of my love for James. It was the way my family participated, the genuine joy they showed, the respect they demonstrated for the life I had built. My father walked me down the aisle with obvious pride, and my mother cried tears of happiness as James and I exchanged vows. Charlotte's maid of honor speech focused not on childhood memories or generic sisterly affection, but on her admiration for the woman I had become, the work I did, and the difference I made in the world. "My sister Vivian has taught me that true success isn't measured by attention or acclaim," she said, addressing our guests, "but by the impact you have on others, by the dedication you show to your principles, and by the courage you demonstrate in pursuing what matters most to you." Detective Martinez, who had become a close friend, gave a toast that brought the law enforcement guests to their feet. "To Dr. Vivian Blackwood, whose commitment to justice has made all of us better at our jobs, and whose expertise has brought closure to families who thought they would never get answers." As James and I danced our first dance as husband and wife, I looked around at the faces of our guests and realized that for the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who truly saw me, respected me, and celebrated me for who I was, rather than who they thought I should be. A year later, I stood in my office as state chief medical examiner, reviewing case files and preparing for a presentation to the state legislature on forensic pathology funding. On my desk sat several framed photographs: my wedding photo with James, a picture of Charlotte and Marcus with their newborn daughter, a family photo from my parents' anniversary celebration, and a newspaper clipping from the pharmaceutical murder case. My phone rang, and I answered to hear Charlotte's excited voice. "Vivian, you'll never guess what happened. Emma said her first word this morning." Emma was Charlotte's 6-month-old daughter, my niece, who had quickly become the center of our extended family's attention. "That's wonderful. What did she say?" "She said, Viv. Her first word was your name, or at least her version of it. Marcus thinks she was trying to say Vivian because we talk about you so much." The idea that my niece's first word had been an attempt to say my name filled me with joy that I couldn't have imagined a few years earlier. "I can't wait to see her this weekend," I said. "Maybe by then she'll have the whole name figured out." "She adores you, you know. When we show her your picture, she gets this huge smile and reaches for it. I think she already knows that Aunt Vivian is someone special." After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The painful confrontation at Charlotte's wedding had catalyzed changes that transformed not just my relationship with my family, but my understanding of my own worth. I had spent decades trying to earn respect and recognition from people who were too caught up in their own dynamics to see me clearly. The irony was that all along, I had been building a reputation and earning respect in the professional community that valued expertise, dedication, and results. The validation I had sought from my family had been available in my work all along, but I had been so focused on the absence of recognition at home that I hadn't fully appreciated the recognition I had earned elsewhere. Now, finally, I had both. My family saw me clearly and celebrated my achievements, while my professional community continued to value and respect my contributions. The little girl who had felt invisible had grown into a woman whose voice carried weight, whose expertise was sought after, and whose work made a real difference in the world. My assistant knocked on my door, interrupting my reflections. "Dr. Blackwood, the governor's office is online too. They want to discuss your appointment to the National Forensic Science Commission." I smiled and reached for the phone. "Dr. Blackwood speaking." As I took the call about this new opportunity to influence forensic science policy at the national level, I thought about Charlotte's words at the wedding, that I had taught her true success isn't measured by attention or acclaim, but by impact, dedication, and courage. She was right, but she had also learned something I was still discovering. The greatest success of all is being seen, understood, and valued by the people who matter most to you. The phone conversation about the National Commission lasted 40 minutes and ended with my acceptance of the appointment. As I hung up, I realized this was exactly the kind of achievement that, in the past, I would have celebrated alone or shared only with James. Instead, I picked up my phone and called my family. My parents were thrilled and wanted to know every detail about the appointment and what it would mean for forensic science nationwide. Charlotte immediately started planning a celebration dinner and asked if she could bring Emma so that my niece could witness Aunt Vivian making history. As I sat in my office, surrounded by the evidence of a career built on expertise and dedication, planning a celebration with a family who finally saw and valued my achievements, I understood that the confrontation at Charlotte's wedding hadn't just changed our family dynamics. It had given me permission to finally claim the recognition I had earned, to stand in my authority without apology, and to expect the respect that my work and character deserved. The invisible daughter had finally learned to be seen, and in being seen, had discovered that she had been worthy of recognition all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.